Mr. Bielik had gone back, so they already had data as to what was going to go on. They knew that they were going to make these breakthroughs, and you had some of the basic data and information that they brought back. If you have a time experiment from 1943 and you have one in 83, and you go back from 83 and say, hey, what happens? This happens. In 83, they pretty much have a jump on the fact that they're going to be successful and at least what lines they have to follow in order to do that. Going back to part of my function, first I was used in the human factoring part of it. I was used as a replacement component to a crystalline part of the time factoring. And they found that I worked a little bit better than a crystalline computer interface, and that I could hold the vortices a lot more stabilized, and I could factor one a lot more stabilized, and that I was a lot more accurate in targeting than they were able to stabilized. And I was a lot more accurate in targeting than they were able to work with this machinery. So at that point, what happened was they would produce these vortices, and then afterwards I would get to go through them with the people that were there. Because remember, at this point, I helped to create it, and I had a real feel for it. This is like part of me was in this, along with some other people of this vortices. So if, let's say we wanted to go back to Vietnam for some reason, and it was time to come back, who better to find out where the door is going to be than the person who actually that door is part of. So I always knew where the vortex was going to open up and when it was going to open up, and I could always find the spot without problem. In the early days, I was still pretty young, and basically I went through with these special forces guys, and they were told, at any cost, make sure the kid doesn't die because you don't come home without him. So they really took care of me. As time went on, I became a bit of a hindrance, and they decided, you better give this guy some training. So I got trained in basic combats, tactics and that sort of thing. And as time went on, I started to become more and more proficient, till eventually I worked my way up to commander. And I was put in charge of 3 special forces groups out of the Fort Hero. One of them had to do with alien factors, all right? Now, I was trained in sonic warfare. Most of the alien warfare at this point had to do with consciousness war and manipulation, war with the Greys, that sort of thing. Now, for the most part, the Greys were in alliance with us, at least the ones that I worked with. Of course, not all of them were. Now, remember, for us, we saw these guys every day. It was no more bizarre than if you went into a fast food store and you saw there's a Hispanic gentleman, you just don't think of it. So you walked around the base and you saw Greys, various types, because there are different nationalities of Gray. And of course, not all of them agree with Alliance. The ones that I was involved with were the ones that worked for Fort Hero and were involved with the Alliance. There were a number of times where we were brought in, and they had, of course, political adversaries within their own regime and their own race, and they needed them taken out or found. We would factor, find them, and go and get them. So we were basically bounty hunters for them. In exchange, we got technologies. We also went on a number of other reconnaissance missions. One of the reasons that I was put in charge of this specific group was, first of all, because I had a heavy experience with a number of the ETs out there, and also because, since I was a rogue empath, I was a translator for them. Now, one of the things that we did was actual reconnaissance missions, and one of the reconnaissance missions, which has been double-blind proofed by us. When I say double-blind proofed, it means that basically I came forward with the story, reported the actual occurrences, and then we just sat on them, and we waited. And then eventually, later on down the line, other people who had come forward that were member of my attack team reported the same thing under various forms of hypnosis and energetic manipulation. Now, what I'm about to tell you is basically one of these missions. We had been sent, we were instructed, and we were debriefed, that we had to go to a place by the name of Aldebaran. Aldebaran is in the Hades system. And on Aldebaran, that there was a specific base in which they were manufacturing biological ships. Now, a biological ship was just that. It was a living entity that was genetically cloned to the inhabitants. Now, a lot of people, when they think of UFOs, they don't realize that, UFOs are really only manufactured by 2 or 3 races. It's like each of you didn't make your own cars. You went to a Chevy dealer or a Ford dealer or, a Suzuki dealer. So basically, there are only a few races that manufacture these ships. Now, in our case, we were going to the Aldebarans. So we went there, and our job was we were supposed to go in, annihilate everything in sight, take one of these ships. The whole idea behind annihilating everything in sight was that we wouldn't be followed and that they couldn't call the ship back. Some of us were supposed to return through the vortices, and some of us were supposed to take the ship and actually come back. I was chosen as one of the people who were going to take the ship back because I had so much experience in the chair to begin with, and as far as the factoring of where Aldebaran was, that I would be able to find my way back. I could factor and the ship would follow. We were sent in. There was 20 of us when we originally came through the vortices. 3 of us died. Most of the guys went back. 15 of us were sent back on the ship. The 3 that died in the ship on the way back. They were just accidental deaths. I was injured at that point in that battle. We used basically, since the atmosphere there was hazardous to us, we didn't want to blow the place up, so we used sound charges, which are basically stun charges. Used a lot of untraditional weapons. I don't like guns, and I never did. Even when I was working in the project, I used unconventional weapons. We went in, we took out everything that we could find and see. We did it very swiftly. It took us all of about 6 minutes to wipe out this entire installation. We took the ship. Now, in the middle, as I said, I was injured. One of the things that happened during the injury was there was a small implantation of a chip, which occurred at the base of my spine. I was being sloppy at that time. I was being cocky, and one of these beings, which we thought were dead, were not quite all dead. Now, inside of this chip, which they nailed me with, was genetic information for the ship. Now, remember, I was supposed to be the pilot at that point, or not actually the pilot, but the navigator. There was someone else that was supposed to be the pilot. We got on the ship, got in a chair, and now I have interfaced my consciousness with this ship. And part of my consciousness is now this chip as well, which gave specific genetic instructions to the ship to start to go into an accelerated geriatric rate. So by the time we brought it back, we were bringing it back to Greenwich, Connecticut, by the time we brought it back, it was pretty much ancient and almost dead. We brought it back, we brought it into an underground mine facility, the general location of which we have information on, and we're doing more research into that. It was brought in, we brought it underground, and it pretty much died within a couple of hours at that point. They tried taking tissue samples and cloning it, and even the tissue samples just aged and died before they could actually do anything with it. As I said, this is one of the specific missions that have been double-blinded. There are numerous missions which are reported, not all of which have been double-blinded yet. Not only by myself, but other members of some of my strike teams that I worked with. Not all of the stuff that we did was just to destroy people and to ruin things. But almost everything had to go around basically usurping power for this group. There was a report that we had been sent back, 3 of us, to the time of Jack the Ripper. The Jack the Ripper was to theoretically kill someone that was going, well, the great-great-grandmother was someone that was going to be useful to the project, and we were supposed to give information as to who it was. Now, they know who it was all along. We basically are told that they didn't know who Jack the Ripper was. They knew who he was. It was just kept silent for political reasons. And basically, we had to go back. We went under the guise that we were from the States. We were special investigators who were supposed to come in and help Scotland Yard. We came in. We were briefed on the basic period and that sort of thing, and what we weren't supposed to know, what we were supposed to know. And we came in, and we basically helped Scotland Yard and led them almost directly to this guy who was involved at the time. It turned out that who it was the Queen's private physician who had a brain lesion. And he was having all sorts of problems at the time. And because it was the Queen's private physician, they figured it would be kind of scandalous and that it would just be kept quiet. So although Jack the Ripper was stopped, and he was stopped in time, it was never publicly released as to who it actually was. And there were a lot of other things. They said, oh, it was this disgruntled midwife. But all the other cases, if you research Jack the Ripper's life at all the other cases fall apart. She wasn't there for one of the murders during the spring and that sort of thing. So no one was actually able to peg him. But if you actually go and you do research on your own, take a look at the Queen's private physician, and if you research where he was and what was going on, he was present in London in proximity to all the places where all the murders had occurred. So that's something you can do in research on your own. One of the things that I usually tell all audiences as well is a lot of this stuff sounds very fantastic. And it really does. And so I encourage people to do research on their own. You know, if this sort of stuff intrigues you, research it on your own. The information is out there. It really is. The proof is out there. You know, if you find it, let us know of some of it too, as well. You know, develop your discernment. Develop your knowing of yourself. You know, these projects seem like they're so massive and they're so expansive that there's just no hope. You know, it's almost despairing. You know, like, gee, they can aim this radar out at me and they can affect the way I think. You know, they can basically, if they don't like me, go back and kill my grandparents. You know, and I'll never come to be. You know, it seems like boggling, but yet, if they could have complete and absolute supreme power, they wouldn't go to the extreme lengths that they do. Apparently, you know, they have the ability to go back as far as they can and to go forward as far as they can, and they never seem to have gotten it. Because at least in this reality line, we still can think at least somewhat freely, most of us, you know. We were talking about mind control, and people go, well, how do you know if you're being affected? Well, didn't you ever notice, like, if you go into work, just everyone is in sort of the same state of mind or holding the same type of head at a given time? It almost goes, well, it usually went in like 90-day cycles. We found that if we produce a thought form and we broadcast it for 90 days, after 90 days, the human consciousness starts to adapt and evolve from it. They start to become stronger because of it. So they would basically produce these, hold them for 90 days and break them down. And change them on a regular basis. And he would not try to hold the same one, but one that would sort of like slip you into what they wanted. They would use specific things depending on other structured forces that they had to do in the world. A lot of psyops that went on. The Gulf Coast War. Now, there was a lot of psyops that went on there. A lot of psyops that went on there. You know, the world period. For instance, the Gulf Coast War, the Gulf Coast War, right? Yeah. Yes, that was a big battle. The Gulf Coast War. Now, there was a lot of psyops that went on there. A lot of psyops that went on there. You know, in that specific war, not only were the psyops going on overseas, they were going on over here. The entire U.S. climate was changing. I mean, everyone went from, remember, after Vietnam, everyone wanted to stay pretty much just a peaceful, neutral nation. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, rah, rah, let's go over there and like wipe them out. You know, and they would show like, oh, we dropped a bomb and, you know, it went right down this elevator shaft and it blew the building to bits. And everyone was like, wow, see what we can do. Yeah, we became, you know, this whole macho mentality again. You know, we were completely preened. You know, just recently we had this bombing that occurred, and where is it? Oklahoma? The bombing in Oklahoma? Yeah. Now, I don't watch television at all right, because a good deal of the programming occurs through television. So I'm watching, you know, I'm listening to the people generally around me, and basically all I heard is they blew up a daycare center. I was like, wow, that's terrible. They blew up a daycare center. I was like, how could they do that? And I was like, yeah, why would anyone target a daycare center? Yesterday was the first time that I actually opened up a newspaper and I looked to see what was going on, and I realized that the daycare center was only a small part of it. You know, we had the Secret Service on the top floor, we had the Guns and Arms Control, we had the, you know, several U.S. military offices in there. They were the target. It had nothing to do with the others. And, I mean, it is a terrible thing that the children would be injured in it, you know, but it's not amazing to me. Children have often been casualties of war. It's a terrible thing. And I'm not saying that it's justifiable, especially being a Montauk boy myself. I definitely do not feel it's justifiable. And I think it's probably one of the greatest horrors. I think anyone that dies in war is a horror. That they could even conceive of blowing up a government agent. I mean, even if I don't agree with what they're doing, I choose, at least consciously, not to be that. And not to have that as the focus of my life. But getting back to that whole thing, that bomb explosion, see how everyone was immediately preened. That's all anyone saw. That's all anybody thought about. And that was what the whole national consciousness was set up about. But yet, in the same breath, if you can just think back to last summer, how many people here have heard of the Atomic Warriors? Anybody here heard of the Atomic Warriors? You guys haven't heard of the Atomic Warriors? All right, basically between World War II and the Korean War, the United States government said, we got to learn, since we have the A-bomb now, how to fight in an atomic war. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 80,000 American troops in small groups, and we're going to bring them out into Yucca Flats. The United States government said, we got to learn, since we have the A-bomb now, how to fight in an atomic war. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 80,000 American troops in small groups, and we're going to bring them out into Yucca Flats, and we're going to tell them, we know what to do in the event of a war. We're going to train you how to fight in an atomic war. We told them some basic ideas, and then we dropped nuclear bombs in near proximity to them to see what would happen. Well, these guys have been dying by the fistfuls over the years. 80,000 young men. 80,000 young men. Well, it finally came to light last year, and in the process of doing the research, we found out, and this was in mass media, how many people heard about the retarded school children that they gave radioactive cereal to? One person. 2, 3, 4. All right? How many people heard about the Oklahoma bombing? Everybody, right? But isn't that odd? It was on TV for just as long that the U.S. government had given radioactive cereal as a test to retarded school children. They figured, well, they're retarded, you know. So let's see what happens. Maybe they'll get smart, you know, or whatever. Who knows why they gave it to them. But the Atomic Warriors, almost no one's heard of them. These school children, yet no one's just about heard of them, even though they've been on TV. It's a matter of how it's presented, and the signatures that's encoded in the TV broadcast as well. And yet this instance, which is, I'm not trying to diminish it at all because it is horrible, everyone has such a violent reaction to. Although all those retarded children, for the most part, are pretty much dead. But we did it, and it slipped through everybody's consciousness. So there's something to think about as far as mind control. So what do we do about this? How do we live in the eye of this storm? Well, basically, some of the people that are hardest to get to are the people that seem to be the smallest people. So it's not a hopeless thing. You know, we're so preened to believe that, gee, I'm just one guy, what can I do? Well, you know, gee, if Muhammad thought this, if Moses thought that, gee, can you imagine if Moses is hanging out and he goes, well, you know, I'm just one guy. Pharaoh's like, you know, my brother, but, you know, he's really got this whole gig going. He's set in, you know. What would have happened? If Martin Luther King would have said, I'm only one guy, what difference is it going to make? You know, I'm not saying that you might not get killed. You know, that's a reality that I face. It's a reality that Preston faces. It's a reality that Al faces. You know, if any time we decide to not become public, and I know this from a fact, we may get killed. I decided to retire in February this year. I said, I'm not going to do any more public speaking. Tonight was supposed to be my last lecture. As soon as I announced that I was no longer going to be public, within 2 weeks, the first attempt was made, and there have been 2 since. So I've decided since then to at least do 1 to 2 lectures a year. So I'll continue to stay somewhat in the public eye and hopefully protect myself from having what happened to Dr. Jessup. Moving along, giving you a little more insight as to the actual structure of consciousness. I wanted to talk a little bit about multiple personality disorder. Now everybody, and like I said, I work with a lot of people in my therapeutic realm. Everybody has multiple personalities. Everybody. You have them, you have them, you have them, you have them. Everybody does. The way you act towards your children is different than the way you act towards your husband. It's different than the way you act towards the guy in the store. It's different than the way you act towards your mother and your father, towards everybody. Everyone has different aspects of themselves, but it's all part of one. It's all part of one consciousness, okay? Now in MPD disorder, what basically happens is this big pie starts to dissociate. The way that you act towards one says, this is all I am, as opposed to another way. This is caused by a number of methods. One method is as a way to protect the consciousness from extreme trauma, okay? Let's say if I draw a circle once again, this circle is you as a being. And a traumatic thing keeps occurring in your life, whatever it is, on a systematic level. Maybe you're ritualistically abused, maybe it's incest, maybe you're just severely physically abused, or you're put into a traumatizing position, the same thing over and over and over again. Now, whenever the situation comes up, you may allocate one specific part to deal with it, and the rest of your time and the rest of your conscious thought, you just ignore it. Doesn't mean that it's not there. It doesn't mean you don't have access to it. It means that you just put your focus away from it. You just don't look at that part of your life. You build a wall. In the project, part of the Montauk Boys Bunker, this is also what they did. And they did it through a number of means. One means was, of course, through the severe beating and basic training like that. Oh, you know what? We'll cattle prod them again. We create this separation. Another thing that they would do is they would create trauma walls. They would drug them heavily. Let's say we'll give them lysergic acid, dimethylate LSD, something like that. And then they would set up a group of dummies. And they would take this guy in and they would go, take this gun and we want you to kill these 4 people. And then he would shoot these dummies and they would go, look, it's your friends. And he would think that he had just killed his friends. This creates a trauma wall, something by which he doesn't want to deal with, so he segregates this part of his consciousness as a trauma wall. Now, behind this trauma wall, that's where they can put all the programming. That's where they manufacture the programming for him. How did they get there? One of the ways that they got there was through the use of VRT, virtual reality. Now, virtual reality, we hear like all these things on TV now, VR Troopers, VR5 on TV, and all of these things. But virtual reality has been around for a long, 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 long time, okay? It goes way back into the 70s. And what they would basically do is they would take someone, and let's say they wanted this lady over here, and they wanted to get to a specific part of her consciousness, okay? First they would drug her up, they'd hook her up to VRT, and then they would lead her into that part of her consciousness that they wanted to access. And they would record what they saw in whatever manifestations it was through, maybe it was just bizarre terrain that she created or whatever, maybe it was just corridors. And they would basically lead her to that point, and then they would find that point in her consciousness, and maybe they wanted to get here, okay? So they wanted to get through this trauma wall, and they would find a small... So they wanted to get through this trauma wall, and they would find a small, tiny doorway in, however she was to get into it, if she had to access it. Then what they would do is whenever they wanted to do it, they would drug her once again, hook her up to VRT, take a joystick, and they'll literally pilot their way in through her experience into this section. That's how they did a lot of our programming as far as the Delta Force people go. As I said, we had a great deal of training. It was specific according to what you did. We were trained in reconnaissance techniques. We were trained in alien technologies. We were trained on some of these ships. Once again, as Preston said, some of the ships are very basic and consistent in design. So if you have, let's say, a Rigelian wedge that comes down, they all pretty much are compartmentalized. and we could strip one down within a half hour. We could strip it down, get it in trucks, and move it out. And that's what we often do. Often when you hear about these crashes, they come down, and all of a sudden there are men in military uniforms with black berets that show up, and within a half hour they pull out and there's nothing there but a hole in the ground. We are the guys that do it. Come in, take it apart, move it out. And it doesn't take a long time at all. They're made to come apart, made to fold up in small sections, and that sort of thing. We're trained to do that. We're trained in various types of warfare. We're trained in psi warfare. A lot of times you hear about the men in black. These are Delta Force people. These are agents for this alliance that basically go to clean things up. That was our job. You know, all these people have information about one of your operations. They saw their photographs. These guys would go and get it. You know, so there's a great deal to what's going on, and I know it's a lot to absorb, and it's a lot to deal with, but it's not at all hopeless. You know, you still have free will. You still have free choices. And next time you get really ticked off and you're aggravated, remember you still have the choice not to act upon it. You know, we have emotions when we have to honor those things. And but there's a difference between acting and reacting. And if you decide to take action in your life as opposed to reacting, you can take command of it. If, you know, it's all about being centered. You know, if we decide to lock horns and go to Montauk Point and drop C4 down air shafts to try and blow everything up, it's not going to stop this. It's not going to stop it. And remember, they have free will too. This is their choice in this consciousness war. They're learning their own lessons. And this is the lessons that they have to learn. When I was there, it was lessons that I had to learn. So, who are we handing this off to tonight? The people from space? Okay, so I want to thank you very much for entertaining me this night and listening to me. We have paid for the back of my extended series, which is, it was given earlier this year and the end of last year. So if you want to come back, check some of those out. We also have flyers if you want to see the subject matter of each of those. So thank you very much. Have a good evening. Is everybody switch on this? Or? Okay, cool.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, guys, you want to check up all these
This concludes the Dawn of Delta lecture. For information on obtaining other copies of this lecture or other lectures and materials produced by the Institute for Perceptual Dynamics concerning the Michael Ash lecture series, please send a self-addressed stamped envelope to the Institute for Perceptual Dynamics, Post Office Box 282, Old Bethpage, New York, 11804.